The Savannah Historical Archives smelled of old paper and dust, a scent that Dr. Rebecca Marsh had grown to love over her 15 years as head archivist. The building itself was a converted antebellum mansion on East Gaston Street, its weathered brick facade hiding rooms stacked floor to ceiling with the city's forgotten memories. On this particular October morning, the humidity hung thick despite the season, and Rebecca found herself wiping moisture from her glasses as she descended into the basement storage area. The new acquisition had arrived 3 days ago, a collection of daguerreotypes and early photographs donated by the estate of Eloise Pemberton, a reclusive collector who had died at 97 without any living relatives. Rebecca's assistant, Marcus Chen, had already begun cataloguing the collection, but this morning he had called her down with unusual urgency in his voice. "You need to see this," Marcus said, not looking up from the light table where he had positioned a photograph. He was 26, methodical, and rarely showed emotion about their work, which made his pale complexion and trembling hands all the more concerning. Rebecca moved beside him, adjusting her glasses to look at the image. The photograph was remarkably well preserved, sealed in what appeared to be an airtight glass frame. The date, April 1849, was inscribed on a small brass plate attached to the bottom of the frame. The image showed 7 young women, ranging in age from perhaps 16 to 30, standing in a formal arrangement on the steps of a grand columned building. They wore dark dresses, typical of the period, high-necked and severe, their faces bearing the solemn expressions required by the long exposure times of early photography. "Beautiful preservation," Rebecca murmured, leaning closer. "The Pemberton collection is proving to be remarkable." "What's the building in the background?" "That's the Mercer Williams house," Marcus said, his voice tight. "Or rather, the location where it would be built decades later. According to my research, this plot was empty in 1849, but look closer at the women." Rebecca pulled over a magnifying glass, one of the large illuminated ones they used for detailed examination. As she focused on the faces of the 7 sisters, she felt her breath catch. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light or perhaps damage to the daguerreotype plate. But no, it was definitely there. Something that should have been impossible with 1849 photographic technology. Behind each woman's eyes, just barely visible when magnified, were tiny, precise reflections. Not the photographer or the camera, as one might expect. Each sister's eyes reflected the same thing, 7 identical images, perfectly clear despite the microscopic scale. What they showed made Rebecca's hands begin to shake. In each reflection was a modern street scene, complete with cars, streetlights, and contemporary buildings. More disturbingly, in each reflection, there appeared to be a person, a different person in each sister's eyes, caught in what looked like a moment of terror, mouths open in screams, hands raised defensively. "That's impossible," Rebecca whispered. "The technology to create such detail, to fake something like this, it didn't exist in 1849. It barely exists now at this scale." Marcus pulled out his laptop, his fingers flying over the keys. "I thought the same thing, so I did some research while I waited for you. Rebecca, these women, the 7 sisters, they all disappeared. October 1849, 1 week after this photograph was supposedly taken. No bodies were ever found, no explanation. They were daughters of one of Savannah's wealthiest shipping merchants, Augustus Fairchild. The disappearances nearly bankrupted the family from the investigation costs and the scandal. The case was never solved." Rebecca felt a chill despite the basement's stuffy warmth. She straightened up, trying to rationalize what she was seeing. "It has to be a modern hoax, someone with digital manipulation skills and access to period photography techniques. Maybe something Eloise Pemberton commissioned before she died." "I thought that too," Marcus said, clicking through files on his screen. "But look at this. The glass frame? I tested it while you were upstairs. The sealant is original, mid-19th century. The frame has never been opened. The photograph inside, I did preliminary testing, the silver content, the paper composition. It's all consistent with 1849 daguerreotype processes. If this is a hoax, it's the most sophisticated one I've ever encountered. Rebecca pulled out her phone, intending to photograph the image for further analysis. But Marcus stopped her. "Don't. I tried that. Look." He showed her his phone screen, several attempted photos of the daguerreotype. In each one, the 7 sisters' faces were blurred beyond recognition, replaced with what looked like static, like old television interference. Only the background remained clear. "What the hell is this?" Rebecca breathed. Before Marcus could answer, the basement lights flickered. Both of them froze, looking up at the fluorescent tubes. In Savannah's old buildings, electrical issues were common, but the timing felt wrong, too coincidental. The lights steadied, but the air in the room felt different, heavier, as if the pressure had changed. Marcus's laptop screen suddenly went black. He cursed, pressing keys, but nothing happened. It just died. It was fully charged. Rebecca reached for the photograph, intending to move it to a more secure location, but Marcus grabbed her wrist. "Wait, look at the reflection. It's changed." She bent down again with the magnifying glass. Her blood went cold. The reflections in the sisters' eyes were different now. Instead of the 7 different people in modern street scenes, all 7 sisters now showed the same reflection, the basement archive room where they were standing. And in each reflection, 2 figures were visible, a woman with short grey hair and glasses, and a young Asian man. Them. Rebecca stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of file boxes. Marcus caught her arm, but his face had gone sheet white. "We need to leave. Now." They backed toward the basement stairs, neither willing to turn away from the photograph. As they reached the first step, Rebecca heard it, a sound like whispered voices, too quiet to make out words, but definitely there, emanating from the direction of the light table. They took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the main archive floor, where 2 other staff members, Janet and Thomas, were working at their desks. Both looked up in surprise at the commotion. "What's wrong?" Janet asked, standing up. She was in her 50s, a long-time volunteer who knew the archives as well as anyone. Rebecca tried to catch her breath, aware of how insane she was about to sound. "The new Pemberton photograph, the one from 1849, something's wrong with it. Very wrong." Thomas, a graduate student in his early 20s, raised an eyebrow. "Wrong how?" Marcus pulled out his phone, showing them the failed photographs. "The static-filled images. We can't photograph it, and there are reflections in the subject's eyes that show modern scenes, and then they changed to show us, while we were looking at it." Janet and Thomas exchanged glances that Rebecca recognized, the look people gave when they thought someone was having a mental health crisis. She couldn't blame them. If someone had told her this story an hour ago, she would have reacted the same way. "I know how it sounds," Rebecca said, forcing calm into her voice, "but we're both seeing the same things. The photograph needs to be examined by experts, maybe the FBI's art fraud division. Something is very wrong with it." "Let me see it," Janet said, moving toward the basement stairs. Rebecca almost stopped her, but realized she needed an objective observer, someone who hadn't been staring at the image for the past 20 minutes. They all descended together, the 4 of them crowding around the light table. Janet picked up the magnifying glass, positioning it over the photograph. She was silent for a long moment, then set the glass down carefully. "I see what you mean about the reflections," she said slowly, "but I'm not sure I understand why you're so disturbed. It's probably just a quirk of the daguerreotype process, some kind of double exposure or chemical reaction on the plate. As for your phones not capturing it properly, these old photographs often have issues with digital reproduction due to the silver content. Rebecca and Marcus looked at each other. But you see the modern images? Marcus pressed. In their eyes? Janet frowned, picking up the glass again. Modern images? I see reflections, but they look like period-appropriate indoor scenes to me. Maybe a sitting room or parlor, nothing modern. That's not possible, Rebecca said, taking the magnifying glass herself. But Janet was right. The reflections now showed what appeared to be a 19th century interior, wallpapered walls, oil lamps, period furniture. No cars, no streetlights, no modern clothing, and most importantly, no terrified faces. I saw what I saw, Marcus said firmly. We both did. Thomas, who had been quiet, cleared his throat. I don't see any reflections at all, just normal eyes. Maybe you two need some coffee, take a break. These basement archives can play tricks on your mind with the poor lighting. Rebecca felt a creeping sense of unreality. She and Marcus had seen the same impossible things, but now the evidence had changed, or worse, had never existed at all. She thought about insisting, about calling in outside experts, but looking at Janet and Thomas's concerned faces, she realized how that would sound. Maybe you're right, she said finally, though she didn't believe it. Marcus and I will take a break. Janet, could you and Thomas box up the Pemberton collection? I want everything moved to the climate-controlled vault upstairs until we complete the cataloguing. Of course, Janet said, relief evident in her voice. Rebecca and Marcus retreated to her office on the second floor. Once the door was closed, Marcus slumped into a chair. I know what I saw. Those reflections showed modern scenes, and then they showed us. I'm not crazy. I know, Rebecca said quietly. I saw it too. But something changed when the others came down, or it only reveals itself to certain people, or we're both experiencing the same hallucination, which seems statistically unlikely. Her desk phone rang, the old-fashioned landline that the archives still maintained. She picked it up. Savannah Historical Archives, Dr. Marsh speaking. The voice on the other end was elderly, female, with a thick Savannah accent. Dr. Marsh, my name is Catherine Bonaventure. I understand you recently acquired the Pemberton collection. Yes, that's correct. How can I help you? I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to believe me, even though what I'm about to tell you will sound insane. The old woman paused. That photograph of the 7 Fairchild sisters, it's not what you think it is. It's a warning and a trap, both at the same time. My grandmother was Eloise Pemberton's sister. Before she died, she told me about that photograph, made me promise never to let it be seen or studied. But Eloise kept it anyway, said someone needed to know the truth, eventually. Rebecca's grip tightened on the phone. Mrs. Bonaventure, what truth? The sisters didn't disappear in 1849. They were taken, and they've been taking people ever since. Every time someone truly sees the photograph, really sees it, one person every decade or so, chosen by whatever looks out through their eyes. My grandmother's brother, my great-uncle William, he was the first to study that photograph in 1903. He vanished 3 days later. They found his coat folded neatly on a bench in Forsyth Park, but no body, no explanation. Rebecca felt the chill return, spreading through her limbs. Mrs. Bonaventure, I appreciate your concern, but what you're describing isn't possible. Dr. Marsh, in the past 174 years, 9 people have genuinely seen that photograph, looked close enough to see what's in those sisters' eyes. 9 people have disappeared from Savannah without a trace, always within 3 days of viewing it. I have documentation, police reports, newspaper clippings. My grandmother kept everything. The photograph is a door, Dr. Marsh, and by looking through it, you've knocked. Something on the other side is going to answer. Rebecca's hands had started trembling again. Even if I believed you, Which I'm not saying I do. What would you suggest I do? Destroy it. Burn it. Break the glass. Expose the plate to sunlight. Destroy it before the 3 days are up. My grandmother was too afraid to do it herself, convinced she'd be punished somehow. But I'm 92 years old, Dr. Marsh. I've outlived my fear. I would have destroyed it myself, but Eloise left it in a trust. I couldn't access it. You can. You have to. Before Rebecca could respond, the line went dead. Not a gentle click of someone hanging up, but a sudden, complete silence, as if the connection had been severed. She tried to dial back, but got only a fast, busy signal. Marcus had been watching her face. What was that about? She told him, watching his expression shift from skepticism to dawning horror. When she finished, he stood up and walked to the window overlooking Gaston Street. It was mid-afternoon, the historic district busy with tourists and locals going about their normal lives, completely unaware of the conversation happening in this old archive building. "Do you believe her?" he asked finally. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "But I believe what we saw in those reflections, and I believe in being cautious." She checked her watch. "It's Wednesday, October 11th. If her pattern holds, we have until Saturday night. So we destroy it." Rebecca thought about her career, her reputation, the historical significance of the Pemberton collection. Then she thought about the terror in those reflected faces, the way the photograph had seemed to respond to their presence, the impossible technology embedded in a century-old image. "We research first," she decided. "Tonight you and I are going to go through every disappearance in Savannah's history, looking for patterns. If Mrs. Bonaventure's story checks out, if there really are 9 unexplained vanishings connected to that photograph, then yes, we destroy it." Marcus nodded slowly. "And if we find the pattern, then we call the police, we warn everyone, and we make sure no one else looks at that photograph. But first, we need to know what we're really dealing with." They worked through the evening, Rebecca ordering pizza while they pored over historical records, police databases, and newspaper archives. The Savannah Chatham Metropolitan Police Department had digitized most of their old case files, and with her academic credentials, Rebecca had access to historical records that would take a civilian weeks to obtain. The pattern emerged slowly, terribly. 1849, the 7 Fairchild sisters. 1903, William Pemberton, Eloise's brother, museum curator. 1927, Elizabeth Crane, a photographer who had been researching early Savannah daguerreotypes. 1954, James Morton, an antiques dealer. 1968, Sarah Whitfield, a graduate student in history. 1982, David Chen, no relation to Marcus, an art restorer. 1996, Michelle Foster, an insurance investigator examining the Pemberton estate. 7 disappearances over 147 years, not 9 as Catherine Bonaventure had claimed. But when Rebecca dug deeper into the 2003 and 2011 records, she found 2 more, listed as missing persons rather than disappearances, because there had been some evidence of where they might have gone, a note left behind, a story of running away. But the families had always insisted something was wrong, that their loved ones would never have left that way. Jennifer Holbrook in 2003, a conservation specialist. Martin Price in 2011, a private collector. 9 people, all connected, however loosely, to historical artifacts, photography, or the Pemberton collection. All vanished without a trace. "It's real," Marcus breathed, looking at the timeline they had constructed. "Every 13 years, give or take a year, someone looks at that photograph and 3 days later they're gone." Rebecca noticed something else. "Look at the years. 1849, the original sisters. Then roughly 13-year gaps, sometimes 12, sometimes 14, but averaging 13. The last one was Martin Price in 2011. That was 14 years ago." "We're overdue," Marcus said quietly. Rebecca's phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. She opened it, then immediately wished she hadn't. It was a photograph, clearly taken from inside the Archives building, showing her and Marcus in her office at that very moment, taken from an impossible angle, as if someone was hovering outside her second-story window. But there was no one there when she rushed to look outside. The second text came immediately after. 3 days, Dr. Marsh. The sisters are waiting. Rebecca didn't sleep that night. She stayed in her apartment in the historic district. Doors locked, curtains drawn, researching everything she could find about the Fairchild family and their mysterious disappearance. Marcus had wanted to stay with her, safety in numbers, but she had sent him home, not wanting to put him in more danger than he already was. At 3:47 a.m., her laptop screen flickered, displaying an image she hadn't opened, the 1849 photograph of the 7 sisters. She slammed the laptop shut, unplugged it and threw it across the room. When she worked up the courage to check it an hour later, the screen was black, the device completely dead despite being fully charged. Thursday morning arrived grey and oppressive, unusual weather for October in Savannah. Rebecca met Marcus at a coffee shop on Broughton Street, both of them looking haggard and frightened. They had agreed not to go to the Archives, not yet, not until they had a plan. "I found something," Marcus said, pushing a folder across the table. "I couldn't sleep, so I went to the public library, looked through their old newspaper collection, the stuff that hasn't been digitized. There was an article from 1850, a year after the sisters vanished. A journalist named Patrick Brennan claimed he had information about the disappearances, said he was going to publish a full exposé. He vanished before the article could run. But his notes were found in his apartment, and the newspaper printed them posthumously." Rebecca opened the folder. The pages inside were photocopies of old newsprint, the text barely legible, but she could make out the key passages. The 7 Fairchild sisters were not victims of kidnapping or foul play, but rather participants in something far more sinister. In the weeks before their disappearance, I interviewed dozens of people who knew them. All reported the same disturbing change in the sisters' behavior. They had become distant, mechanical, speaking in unison when together, finishing each other's sentences in a way that went beyond sisterly intuition. Their eyes, multiple witnesses claimed, had changed. They appeared darker, deeper, as if something was looking out from behind them. The family physician, Dr. Amos Thornton, confided in me that he had examined all 7 sisters 3 days before they vanished. He found their pupils abnormally dilated, unresponsive to light, and claimed he saw movement behind their eyes, like shadows swimming in deep water. He recommended they be committed to an asylum for their own safety. The family refused. 3 days later, they were gone. I believe the sisters were not taken. I believe they invited something in, and when it was ready, they went willingly to wherever it dwells. This photograph, commissioned by their father as a final family portrait, is not a memory, but a doorway. I have seen it, looked deeply into their eyes, and I now understand that my time is limited. If you are reading this, I am already gone. Destroy the photograph. Do not let others make my mistake." Marcus's hands were shaking as he closed the folder. He was right. He saw it, and 3 days later, gone. "Where's the photograph now?" Rebecca asked. "At the Archives, in the vault where Janet and Thomas moved it yesterday. We need to destroy it. Today. Now." Rebecca nodded, but her phone rang before they could stand. The caller ID showed Savannah PD. She answered with a sense of dread. "Dr. Marsh, this is Detective Rita Vasquez with the Savannah Chatham Metropolitan Police. I need you to come down to the station. It's about Janet Holloway and Thomas Wright from your archives." Rebecca's blood went cold. "What about them?" "They didn't come home last night. Their families reported them missing this morning. You were the last person to see them, according to our preliminary investigation. I need to ask you some questions." An hour later, Rebecca sat in an interrogation room at the police station on Habersham Street, Marcus in another room down the hall. Detective Vasquez was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and professional, with the kind of presence that suggested she had seen every kind of human behavior and wasn't easily fooled. "Take me through yesterday," Vasquez said, notebook open. "You and Mr. Chen examined a photograph, got upset about something, and then asked Ms. Holloway and Mr. Wright to pack up the collection. What upset you?" Rebecca had spent the drive to the station trying to decide how much truth to tell. Too little, and she looked evasive. Too much, and she sounded insane. She settled for a middle ground. The photograph had some unusual visual properties, reflections in the subject's eyes that seemed anachronistic for 1849. Marcus and I thought it might be a forgery or a hoax. We wanted other opinions. And what did Ms. Holloway and Mr. Wright think? They didn't see what we saw. They thought we were tired, stressed. We took a break, asked them to secure the collection. What time did you last see them? Around 2 p.m. We left the archives, went to my office to research the photograph's provenance, and they were supposed to pack up the collection and go home. Yes, Vasquez made a note. We found Ms. Holloway's car still in the archives parking lot. Mr. Wright's bicycle was locked up outside. Neither of them made it home, but there's no sign of a struggle, no indication of where they went. The archives were locked when the cleaning crew arrived at 6 p.m. Rebecca felt sick. "Detective, I know this will sound strange, but you need to look into the disappearances connected to the Pemberton collection. There's a pattern. People who study a particular photograph vanish. It's happened 9 times over the past 170 years. Vasquez's expression didn't change, but Rebecca saw the subtle shift in her posture, the way cops moved when they thought they were dealing with someone unstable. "You're telling me a photograph makes people disappear?" "I'm telling you there's a documented pattern of disappearances. And they're all connected to that photograph. I have the research, the police reports, newspaper articles. Something about that image is dangerous. Dr. Marsh, I appreciate your concern, but let's focus on the present. Do you know of anyone who might have wanted to harm Ms. Holloway or Mr. Wright? Any disputes, conflicts, unusual interactions?" They kept her for another 2 hours, going over the same questions from different angles. Finally, Vasquez let her go with instructions not to leave town. Marcus was released at the same time, and they met in the parking lot. "She thinks we're involved," Marcus said. "She didn't say it, but I could tell." "We need to get to the archives, get that photograph and destroy it," Rebecca said, "before anyone else looks at it." They drove to the archives, but found yellow police tape across the entrance. A uniformed officer stood by the door. "Crime scene," he said when they approached. "No entry until the investigation is complete." "I'm the director," Rebecca protested. "This is my workplace." "Detective's orders, ma'am. No one enters until they've finished processing the scene." Rebecca wanted to scream, to push past him, to grab the photograph and smash it right there in the street. Instead, she forced herself to nod and walk away. Back in her car, she gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. "It's Thursday afternoon. If the pattern holds, we have until Saturday night. But that photograph is locked in a police crime scene, and we can't get to it." Marcus pulled out his phone. "The archives have security cameras. Maybe they caught what happened to Janet and Thomas. We could access the feeds remotely." Rebecca had the access codes memorized. She pulled out her own phone, navigating to the archive's security system. There were 12 cameras throughout the building, all recording 24/7 to a cloud server. She pulled up Wednesday's footage, fast-forwarding to 2:00 p.m. when she and Marcus had left. The timestamp showed Janet and Thomas descending to the basement, moving the photograph and other items from the Pemberton collection to rolling carts. At 2:47 p.m., they began transporting everything to the climate-controlled vault on the second floor. At 3:15 p.m., Thomas paused in the hallway outside the vault, staring at something in his hands. Rebecca zoomed in. He was holding the framed photograph of the seven sisters, looking at it intently. "No," Rebecca whispered. "Don't look at it. Don't look close." But Thomas did. He pulled out his phone, using its flashlight and camera as an impromptu magnifying glass, peering closely at the faces in the photograph. After a moment, he staggered backward, nearly dropping the frame. He called out, and Janet appeared in the frame. Thomas showed her the photograph, pointing at something. Janet leaned in close. Both of them stared at the image for nearly a minute. Then Janet pulled back, shaking her head. They appeared to be arguing about what they were seeing. Finally, Janet took the photograph and carried it into the vault, Thomas following. Rebecca fast-forwarded. At 4:23 p.m., Janet and Thomas exited the vault, both looking pale and shaken. They went upstairs to the main archive floor. The camera showed them sitting at their desks, not working, just sitting with blank expressions. At 5:47 p.m., both of them stood simultaneously, moving with strange synchronization. They walked to the front entrance, unlocked it from the inside, and stepped out into the street. The external camera showed them turning left on Gaston Street, walking side by side with identical gaits and disappearing from view. "They saw it," Marcus breathed. "They looked close, and they saw what we saw, and now something has them." Rebecca's phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "2 days, Dr. Marsh. You and Mr. Chen looked first. You have until Saturday midnight. The sisters need 7. They've waited so long to be complete again." Marcus read the message over her shoulder. 7. The original sisters. Every 13 years they take people, one at a time usually. But they need 7 in total to complete something. We're numbers 3 and 4. Janet and Thomas are 1 and 2. "They need 3 more," Rebecca said, her mind racing. "We have to warn people, keep them away from that photograph." "Who else has access to the vault?" Marcus asked. Rebecca's stomach dropped. "The police. Vasquez said they were processing the crime scene. They'll catalogue everything in that vault. If they look at the photograph." They drove back to the police station, but Vasquez refused to see them. A desk sergeant took Rebecca's increasingly frantic message about the photograph being dangerous, that no one should examine it closely, but the look on his face suggested the message would go straight into a file marked "Crazy Witness Statements." Rebecca tried calling Catherine Bonaventure, the elderly woman who had warned her, but the number she'd called from wasn't in service. A reverse lookup showed no Catherine Bonaventure listed in Savannah or the surrounding counties. It was as if she had never existed. That night, Rebecca and Marcus stayed together at her apartment, door barricaded, lights on. They took turns keeping watch, though neither of them could really sleep. At 2:30 a.m., all the lights in the apartment went out. Rebecca reached for her phone flashlight, but Marcus grabbed her wrist. "Look," he whispered. In the darkness, 7 points of pale light had appeared, hovering near the ceiling. As Rebecca's eyes adjusted, she realized they were figures, translucent and glowing faintly, 7 women in 19th century dresses. Their faces were beautiful and terrible, eyes dark and empty, mouths moving in silent speech. "They're not real," Rebecca said, but her voice shook. "This is psychological, a hallucination induced by stress and fear." The 7 figures drifted closer, and Rebecca could see their faces more clearly now. They were the Fairchild sisters, exact matches to the photograph. As they approached, Rebecca heard whispers, not with her ears, but inside her mind. 3 days, midnight Saturday. The door opens at Bonaventure Cemetery. Come willingly and join us. Resist, and we take those you love. 7 must complete the circle. You have been chosen." "Chosen for what?" Rebecca demanded, surprising herself with her boldness. "What are you? What do you want?" The sisters' images flickered, and for a moment, Rebecca saw something else, something vast and dark, a presence that filled her apartment and extended beyond it, beyond the city, perhaps beyond the world itself. The sisters were not captors, but prisoners, avatars of something that had trapped them in 1849 and used them to trap others since. "We were promised freedom," the voices whispered. "We sought power beyond the veil, knowledge beyond life. We made a bargain, every 13 years 7 souls. In exchange, we would live forever, see everything, know everything. But we remain frozen, trapped in that moment of the photograph. We need completion. 7 from this cycle, and the door truly opens. We can finally leave this prison, and you can take our place. Watch through the photograph, see all of time, all of space. It is a gift." "It's a curse," Marcus said. "You're trapped, and you want to trap us." The figures moved closer, their faces inches from Rebecca and Marcus now. Up close, Rebecca could see the horror in their eyes, the awareness of what they had become. "Please," one of them whispered, her voice younger than the others. "We were foolish. We wanted to escape the limitations of womanhood in our time, to have agency, to choose our own destinies. A traveling photographer offered us a way. His camera, he said, didn't just capture images. It captured souls, preserved them, made them eternal. We agreed, all 7 of us, sisters bound by blood and ambition. But he lied. We are not eternal. We are frozen, aware but powerless, seeing through every person who looks closely at our photograph, but unable to act, unable to die, unable to be free. The only release is to complete the cycle. 7 souls to replace us, and we can finally rest." "No," Rebecca said firmly, "we won't do it. We'll destroy the photograph, break the cycle." The younger sister's image flickered with what might have been sadness. "You cannot. The photograph is not the prison, only the door. We are bound to this city, to this place, until the cycle completes. Destroy the photograph, and you destroy only your own chance to choose your fate. Saturday at midnight, the door opens, whether you come or not. Better to walk through willingly than be dragged." The lights came back on suddenly, and the 7 figures vanished. Rebecca and Marcus found themselves alone in the apartment, dawn breaking outside the windows. Friday morning arrived with no relief. Rebecca checked her phone obsessively, hoping for news about Janet and Thomas, but there was nothing. The police investigation continued, but without leads or witnesses, the case was already growing cold. Marcus pulled up local news sites on his tablet. "Rebecca, look at this." The headline made her stomach clench. 2 more missing after Archives investigation. The article detailed how Detective Rita Vasquez and Officer James Park had failed to report for duty Friday morning after working late Thursday night at the Archives crime scene. Their families had filed missing persons reports. The last known sighting was Thursday at 11:47 p.m., captured on the Archives' external security camera, showing them leaving the building and walking toward Forsyth Park. 4, Marcus said. "They need 3 more, and we're the ones who looked first, which means we're the primary targets," Rebecca finished. "They'll take others if they have to, but they want us." Rebecca made a decision. She called every contact she had. Archaeologists, historians, paranormal investigators, anyone who might have expertise in breaking supernatural bonds. Most thought she was having a breakdown. 2 hung up on her. But one, a professor of folklore at the University of Georgia named Dr. Huang, listened to the entire story without interrupting. "I've heard of similar phenomena," Dr. Huang said carefully. "Photographs as spiritual traps, daguerreotypes specifically. The early process involved silver and mercury, elements associated with mirrors and reflection in mystical traditions. If someone knew the right rituals, the right invocations, they could theoretically bind souls to the image. But breaking such a binding is not simple." "How do we do it?" Rebecca asked desperately. "You need to understand the nature of the contract. These sisters, they made a choice. They agreed to the terms. To break the binding, you would need their true consent to be released, or you would need to expose the lie at the heart of their agreement. Show them that what they were promised is false, that the bargain was corrupt from the beginning." Rebecca thought about the youngest sister's words. They were promised freedom, power, knowledge. Instead, they got prison. Exactly. The photographer, whoever he was, lied to them. If you can prove that, show them evidence that breaks the agreement's foundation. The binding should dissolve. But you'll need to do it at the right time and place. Midnight on the third day, I would guess, when the door is open and the binding is most vulnerable. "Bonaventure Cemetery," Rebecca said, remembering the whispered words. "That's where the door opens." Then that's where you need to be," Dr. Huang said, "with evidence of the lie. And Dr. Marsh, be careful. Whatever bound those sisters is still out there, and it will not want its prize to escape." Rebecca spent Friday researching Augustus Fairchild and the mysterious photographer who had taken the sisters' portrait. Census records from 1849 showed no professional photographers in Savannah with a studio on the date the photograph was supposedly taken. But she found something else, a ship's manifest from April 1849 listing passengers arriving in Savannah from New Orleans. Among them was Lucien Devereux, listed as traveling daguerreotypist. Further research into New Orleans newspapers from 1848 revealed a scandal. Devereux had been accused of fraud, and worse, 7 young women in New Orleans had vanished after having their portraits taken by him. The case had never been solved, but the women's families had blamed Devereux, forced him to flee the city. Rebecca found more. Atlanta, 1835. Before the city was even officially established, 7 Creek women from a nearby settlement vanished after an itinerant photographer passed through. Charleston, 1842, 7 daughters of a plantation owner, gone without a trace after a formal portrait session. The pattern went back further than 1849, and it always involved 7. "He's been doing this for decades," Rebecca told Marcus, spreading out the documents on her apartment floor, maybe longer, creating sets of 7, binding them to his photographic plates, using them as some kind of network or power source. The Fairchild sisters weren't the first. They're just the set that survived, the only photograph that wasn't destroyed. "Then how do we prove the lie?" Marcus asked. Rebecca pulled out the oldest document, a letter written in 1835 by a Creek medicine woman, translated and preserved in the Georgia Historical Society archives. It described a shadow man with a black box who promised to capture spirits and give them power over their enemies. The 7 Creek women who agreed were never seen again, but the medicine woman reported seeing them in dreams, screaming, trapped in darkness, unable to die or escape. "This," Rebecca said, holding up the letter, "this is from 19 years before the Fairchild sisters. The photographer told them they would be eternal, that they would have power. But he'd been trapping women for decades before them. He lied to the Creek women too, and to the women in Charleston and New Orleans. The Fairchild sisters weren't special. They weren't chosen for their ambition or power. They were just the next set of 7 in a long line of victims. That's the lie that breaks the contract." Saturday arrived too quickly. Rebecca and Marcus spent the day preparing, printing copies of every document they had found. The census records showing no photographer, the ship's manifest listing Devereux as a passenger, the newspaper articles about the vanished women in other cities, the Creek medicine woman's letter. They assembled it all into a portfolio, evidence of the photographer's deception spanning decades. At 11:00 p.m., they drove to Bonaventure Cemetery, the beautiful sprawling graveyard on the bluffs overlooking the Wilmington River. The cemetery gates were locked, but Rebecca had researched the layout and found a section of old fence that could be climbed. They entered illegally, knowing they were probably on security cameras, but not caring anymore. The cemetery was eerily beautiful in the moonlight. Spanish moss hanging from ancient oaks, elaborate Victorian monuments rising from the ground like silent sentinels. Rebecca led the way to the oldest section, where the Fairchild family plot was located. The sisters' graves were there, 7 marble headstones arranged in a circle, though everyone knew the graves were empty, cenotaphs marking losses rather than burials. At 11:47 p.m., the air began to change. Rebecca felt it first, a pressure building, the sense of a door about to open. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in seconds. Frost formed on the gravestones. At 11:55 p.m. they appeared. Not just the 7 Fairchild sisters, but others, the Creek women, dressed in traditional clothing from the 1830s, the Charleston daughters in their finest antebellum gowns, the New Orleans girls in simpler dresses, set after set of 7, arranged in concentric circles around the Fairchild graves, all of them translucent, all of them staring with empty eyes. "He trapped them all," Marcus whispered. "Every set of 7. They're all still here." At 11:58 p.m., 4 figures emerged from the shadows between the gravestones. Janet and Thomas, moving with mechanical precision, their eyes reflecting darkness. Detective Vasquez and Officer Park, following behind them. All 4 moved toward Rebecca and Marcus. "2 more," Janet said, but it wasn't her voice. It was something else speaking through her. 7 to complete the circle. You looked first. You are chosen. Come willingly. Rebecca held up the portfolio. "I have something to show the sisters first, evidence they need to see." The 4 possessed people stopped. The 7 Fairchild sisters, glowing brighter than the others, moved forward through the circle of their predecessor victims. At midnight exactly, the temperature plummeted further, and Rebecca saw it, the door. It manifested as a spiral of darkness above the center of the gravestone circle, a tear in reality, pulsing with anti-light. From within it, she could feel something vast and hungry watching. "The photographer!" Rebecca shouted, holding up the document so all the assembled spirits could see. "Lucien Devereux, you thought he chose you for your ambition, your power, your desire for freedom, but that was a lie." She showed them the ship's manifest. "He arrived in Savannah on April 3rd, 1849. He came from New Orleans, where 7 women had vanished after their portraits were taken. He fled because their families blamed him." She showed them the newspaper articles. Charleston, 1842, 7 more. Atlanta, 1835, 7 more. He'd been doing this for decades before you. You weren't special. You weren't chosen for your strength or your desires. You were just the next available set of 7, the easiest targets, the most convenient victims. The Creek medicine woman's letter came last. 19 years before your photograph, he trapped 7 women from a Creek settlement. They were promised power, too, but look at them. Rebecca pointed to the translucent figures of the Creek women in the outer circle. "They're still here, still trapped just like you. His promise was empty. You were never going to be eternal and powerful. You were always going to be prisoners. The bargain was false from the moment he spoke it." The 7 Fairchild sisters' images flickered, their forms becoming less solid. The youngest one, the one who had spoken before, moved closer to Rebecca. "We were fools," she whispered, but this time her voice held something new, anger instead of despair. "We believed his lies because we wanted them to be true. We were so desperate to escape the prison of our gender and our time that we walked into a worse prison willingly." The other sisters began to speak, their voices joining together. "We agree to nullify the contract. We reject the terms. We were deceived, and therefore the bargain is void." The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The spiral of darkness above the graves began to shrink, pulsing erratically. From within it, Rebecca heard a scream, not human, the sound of something vast and ancient being denied its prize. The circle of trapped women, all the sets of 7 from across the decades, began to fade, their translucent forms dissolving into motes of light. But the presence within the spiral wasn't going to surrender easily. The 4 possessed people, Janet, Thomas, Vasquez, and Park, collapsed to the ground as if their strings had been cut. Then something else emerged from the spiral. A figure, tall and gaunt, dressed in 19th century traveling clothes. His face was obscured by shadow, but his hands were visible, and Rebecca saw they were wrong, too long. Too many joints, fingers that ended in points that might have been claws or photographic needles. "Mine!" the figure hissed, its voice layered with harmonics that made Rebecca's ears bleed. "The contract is mine." They agreed. 7 sets of 7 across 7 decades, 49 souls to anchor the door. I'm so close. I will not be denied. "You lied to them," Marcus shouted, surprising Rebecca with his boldness. "A contract based on deception is null and void. You have no claim." The figure, Devereaux, or whatever wore Devereaux's form, moved toward them with impossible speed. Rebecca felt cold fingers close around her throat, lifting her off the ground. "I am beyond your mortal laws. I exist in the spaces between, feeding on trapped souls, growing stronger with each set I bind. The Fairchild sisters were the completion of my 7th set. With them, I could leave the in-between and walk your world freely, corporeal and powerful. You cannot take that from me." Rebecca clawed at the fingers around her throat, but they were like iron. Her vision began to darken at the edges. Then she heard the youngest Fairchild sister's voice, not whispered but shouted, with more power than Rebecca had heard from any of the trapped spirits. "We can, and we do!" The 7 Fairchild sisters, now glowing blindingly bright, moved as one, passing through Rebecca and surrounding the figure of Devereaux. Their light seemed to burn him, force him to release Rebecca. She fell to the ground, gasping, while the sisters closed in. "You showed us how it works," the youngest sister said, her voice filled with righteous fury. "You taught us through the photograph. We see through the eyes of those who look at our image. We exist in multiple times and places simultaneously. We've spent 174 years watching, learning, understanding the nature of our prison, and now we understand how to break it." The 7 sisters placed their glowing hands on Devereaux's form, and Rebecca saw something extraordinary happen. The figure began to crack, light breaking through the shadows of his body like dawn through clouds. He screamed again, that terrible layered sound, and tried to flee back to the spiral. But the Creek women, the Charleston daughters, the New Orleans girls, all the sets of 7 who had been trapped across the decades, they moved forward too. 42 spirits, all of them now freed from their paralysis, all of them focused on the monster who had imprisoned them. They pulled him apart, not violently but methodically, unraveling the spiritual bonds that held his form together, exposing the truth beneath the lie. What they revealed was not a man at all, but a hunger, a need, a void that consumed souls to sustain itself. It had taken human form to walk among mortals, had called itself Devereaux and other names across centuries, had used photography as a trap, because cameras were perfect prisons, devices that captured and froze moments in time. But without the power of the trapped souls sustaining it, without the completed 7 sets of 7 to anchor its manifestation, it was just hunger without substance, need without form. The freed spirits, 49 women who had been prisoners for decades or centuries, tore it into nothingness, scattering it across the spaces between moments where it could never again coalesce. The spiral of darkness collapsed in on itself and vanished with a sound like breaking glass. The cemetery was suddenly perfectly silent. The 7 Fairchild sisters turned to Rebecca and Marcus. The youngest one smiled, the first genuine expression Rebecca had seen on any of their faces. "Thank you," she said simply. "You gave us the truth, and the truth gave us the power to break our chains. We are free now. They are all free." She gestured to the other spirits, who were beginning to fade, not into trapped paralysis, but into peaceful dissolution. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked, her voice hoarse from the choking. "We go where we should have gone in 1849, not trapped, not bound, just free to move on. And you—" The sister looked at the 4 unconscious people on the ground. "You saved them. They looked at the photograph, but you broke the binding before the door could open fully. They'll wake confused and frightened, but they'll wake. They won't be taken." As she spoke, the spirits faded completely, the cemetery returning to its normal appearance. The frost melted, the temperature rose, and the sense of pressure and wrongness that had filled the air dissipated like morning fog. Janet stirred first, sitting up and looking around in confusion. "Where are we? What happened?" The others woke shortly after, equally disoriented. None of them remembered anything after looking at the photograph. Their last clear memories were of their normal lives, normal days, before the photograph had caught their attention and pulled them toward the door. Rebecca and Marcus called 911, and soon the cemetery was filled with police cars and ambulances. The story they told was simple. They had tracked the 4 missing people to Bonaventure Cemetery using cell phone location data. A lie, but one that was easier to believe than the truth. The 4 were checked for injuries and found to be physically unharmed, though psychologically shaken. Detective Vasquez, once she had been cleared by the paramedics, pulled Rebecca aside. "I don't know what really happened here tonight, and part of me doesn't want to know, but thank you for finding us." She paused. "That photograph in your archives, the one I looked at Thursday night, I need you to destroy it." "You remember?" Rebecca asked, surprised. "Fragments. Enough to know it's dangerous. Enough to know I never want to see it again." Rebecca nodded. "It'll be destroyed. I promise." Sunday morning, with police permission, Rebecca and Marcus returned to the archives. The photograph was still in the vault where Janet and Thomas had placed it, still in its glass frame, still showing 7 beautiful young women on the steps of a building that didn't yet exist when the image was captured. But when Rebecca looked closely at the sisters' eyes, she saw no reflections, no trapped scenes, no modern horror. Just 19th century pupils, dilated from the long exposure, showing nothing but the blank wall behind the photographer. The door was closed. The prison was empty. They took the photograph to Forsyth Park, to an empty area away from the walking paths. Rebecca brought a hammer and protective goggles. Marcus stood beside her as she raised the hammer and brought it down on the glass frame. The glass shattered with a normal, mundane sound. No supernatural wind, no screaming spirits, no dramatic farewell. Just broken glass and a daguerreotype plate cracked down the middle. Rebecca exposed the plate to direct sunlight, knowing the UV radiation would degrade any remaining image quickly. As they watched, the sisters' faces in the photograph faded, not dramatically but gradually, like any old photograph exposed to destructive light. Within an hour, the plate was blank, showing only the ghostly outline of where images had once been. "It's over," Marcus said quietly. "For us," Rebecca agreed. "But they're free too. All of them. After so long, they're finally free." They returned to the archives, and Rebecca filed a report with the police, the university, and the Historical Society. The official story was that the photograph had been damaged during the investigation, exposed to environmental conditions that destroyed the image. No one questioned it too closely. Everyone was too relieved that the 4 missing people had been found alive. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal. Janet and Thomas returned to work, though both requested transfers to different departments, unable to shake their discomfort around the archives. Detective Vasquez threw herself into solving conventional crimes, grateful for problems that had logical solutions. Officer Park went back to his patrol routes, finding comfort in the mundane rhythms of law enforcement. Rebecca and Marcus continued their work, preserving Savannah's history, but with a new appreciation for the weight of the past and the importance of truth. They never told anyone the full story of what happened that night in Bonaventure Cemetery. Who would believe it? But Rebecca kept all the documentation she had gathered, the ship's manifests, the newspaper articles, the letter from the Creek medicine woman, evidence of the photographer's decades of deception. She compiled it into a private archive, stored in a secure location with instructions that it should be made public if anything similar ever happened again. 3 months later, Rebecca received a letter postmarked from New Orleans, though the return address was illegible. Inside was a single page. Written in elegant 19th century script, Dr. Marsh, we wanted you to know that we are at peace, all of us, the 49 who were trapped. We've moved on to whatever lies beyond, and we are grateful for the freedom you gave us. But we also wanted to warn you. The thing that called itself Devereaux, the hunger that trapped us, it was scattered but not destroyed. Such things cannot be truly killed, only dispersed. It will take time, decades or centuries, but it will eventually coalesce again, take a new form, find a new method of trapping souls. Watch for the signs, new technology that promises to capture and preserve, new methods that freeze people in moments of time. The trap may look different, but the hunger behind it will be the same. When it returns, remember the truth. No bargain made with such things is honest, and no prison they build is permanent. The truth can always set people free if they're brave enough to seek it and speak it. With eternal gratitude, the 7 Sisters of Savannah. Rebecca pinned the letter to her office bulletin board, where she could see it every day. It served as a reminder, both hopeful and cautionary. The sisters were free, but the battle between those who would trap human souls and those who would liberate them was ongoing, perhaps eternal. She thought about freedom, what the sisters had sought, and what they had lost in their search for it. They had lived in a time when women's choices were severely limited, when ambition and power were denied to them based solely on their gender. They had been desperate enough to believe impossible promises, to trust a stranger who offered them what society would not. And in the end, their true liberation had come not from supernatural power, but from the simple truth, the revelation that they had been lied to, that their bargain was void, that they deserved better than the prison they had been given. Truth had set them free. Truth spoken by someone who risked everything to give them that knowledge. Rebecca looked out her office window at the streets of Savannah, at the tourists and locals going about their daily lives, most of them never knowing how close their city had come to becoming a permanent feeding ground for something ancient and hungry. She thought about all the people throughout history who had been trapped, literally or metaphorically, by false promises and corrupt bargains. And she thought about the power of truth to break those chains, if only people were brave enough to seek it and speak it. The photograph was destroyed, the door was closed, and the sisters were free. But Rebecca knew that somewhere, in some form not yet manifested, the hunger was waiting, patient and persistent, ready to offer new bargains to new victims in new ways. Technology would evolve, society would change, but the fundamental equation would remain the same. Something that fed on trapped souls would seek new methods to build its prisons, and when it returned, there would need to be people willing to fight it, willing to seek the truth and speak it, no matter the cost. People who understood that freedom, true freedom, could never be granted by those who sought to control and contain. It could only be claimed through knowledge, through resistance, through the courage to reject false promises and break corrupt contracts. Rebecca returned to her work, cataloguing Savannah's history, preserving its memories, but now with a deeper understanding of why that work mattered. History was not just about remembering the past. It was about learning its lessons, recognizing its patterns, and using that knowledge to protect the future. The seven sisters had paid a terrible price for their freedom, 174 years trapped in a photograph, aware but powerless, watching time pass while unable to participate in it. But in the end, they had reclaimed their agency, had used the very mechanism of their imprisonment to achieve their liberation. They had taught Rebecca that no prison is truly inescapable if you understand its nature, and no bargain is truly binding if it's founded on lies. As the afternoon sun slanted through her office window, Rebecca pulled out a fresh notebook and began to write, documenting everything that had happened, creating a record that would survive her, that would be there for whoever might need it in the future when the hunger returned in a new form. Because it would return. Of that she was certain, but she was equally certain that there would be people ready to fight it. People who understood that the price of freedom was eternal vigilance, and that the weapon against those who would trap and control others was always, always the truth. The seven sisters of Savannah were free, and their freedom was a message to everyone who came after them, that no matter how powerful the forces arrayed against human liberty, no matter how sophisticated the traps became, the truth would always be stronger, and the human desire for genuine freedom would always, eventually, prevail. Rebecca finished writing and closed the notebook, storing it in her locked desk drawer alongside the other documentation she had compiled. Then she returned to her normal work, cataloging artifacts, preserving documents, helping researchers and students understand Savannah's rich and complex history. But she never forgot the seven sisters, or the lesson they had taught her about the nature of freedom and the power of truth. And she never stopped watching for the signs that the hunger had returned, ready to speak truth to lies, to break corrupt bargains, to ensure that no one else would be trapped the way the sisters had been trapped. The photograph was destroyed, but the story lived on, a warning and a hope, a reminder that even the most sophisticated prison could be broken by those brave enough to seek the truth and strong enough to speak it, regardless of the cost. And in that truth, in that resistance, in that refusal to accept false promises and corrupt bargains, lay the true meaning of freedom, not just for the seven sisters of Savannah, but for everyone who would come after them, for all time.